Okay, so this is a study from New York University, and it's conducted by Pradeep Mali and his colleagues, and together with us in Toronto. And I actually presenting his presentation, but I do have a conflict of interest. So just to answer to you about the cells of NAVA, or the use of NAVA. I have royalty because I'm an inventor. So anyway, so since I have some of the patents on this technology, and I see the royalty increasing all the time, so I think that the use is increasing quite a bit. So as we have gone now from like the adults, which was the first part of this session, and now we're down to pediatrics, and then finally at the premature babies. We are here dealing with a study that has been done in a New York University. The objective was to evaluate patient-ventilator interaction during patient-triggered ventilation, which is SIMV plus pressure support. And S in SIMV stands for synchronized, don't forget that. And the other one is during NAVA. The design of the study was that 23 intubated neonates in the NICU were equipped with a NAVA catheter. EDI signals and ventilator parameters were recorded continuously during 3 30-minute conditions. First condition is SIMV. It's SIMV plus pressure support using the clinical settings. That means whatever the doctors had chosen prior to the study. 2 was NAVA level set to match the peak pressure of the first period. And the third period was, we called it optimized or improved. That was to use NAVA monitoring to improve the SIMV settings and with the feedback from DDI. So we performed this in 23 patients, 14 female, 9 male of different ethnicity. The gestation age was 27 weeks, the birth weight 780 grams, ranging from 490 to 3.6 kilos. So these were both small and almost term babies. The 5-minute APGAR score was 8. Age at the time of study in days was 7. Weight at the time of study in grams was 1.4 kilos. The ventilator days prior to study was 7 days. Some had been on for 1 day only, one for 62 days. The respiratory distress syndrome was present in 52% of the patients. Bronchopulmonary dysplasia, 26% of patients. Meconium aspiration syndrome in 13% of the patients. Transient tachypnea of newborn in 7% of the patients. Ventilator settings during SIMV was 13 centimeters of water peak inspiratory pressure. The pressure support was set to 11 centimeters of water. The PEEP was 5 in SIMV. The pressure control rate was 30 before and was lowered to 25 during the second SIMV period. The FRS2 was 30 in the first period, 28 during the other, and it should be like in the 30 during the NAVA period too. The I time during SIMV was set to 0.35 and 0.36 in the 2 different periods. The NAVA level was on average 1.1. So patient monitoring heart rate, 158, 148, wasn't counted during NAVA, or we could, but there was no effect. Saturation was the same throughout all 3 periods. The pH was measured, like blood gases was taken before and after, so that was 7.3 and no change till after. PaC2 42 and 43 before and after the study. And basic says did change a little bit, but not significant. The breathing pattern. So what we see here is the peak EDI and the minimum EDI. So this would be the end of inspiration, and this is the end of expiration. We find that there were about 8 microvolts peak activity in these little babies, and they had about 2 microvolts residual when they were during the exhalation period. This was not different for any of the 3 modes, except for the tonic activity showed the significance. It was lower with NAVA, but it was really so little, I don't think I want to talk about it. It was the same thing for the peak and mean pressures, the minimum pressures during the ventilator pressures. That was like slight difference that NAVA had a little bit higher minimum pressure than the 2 other modes, but again, very, very small changes, not worth talking about. And for the peak pressures, we were 12 centimeters of water on average over a PEEP of 5. Respiratory rate, 60 in both modes. So SIMV, NAVA, and SIMV optimized, nothing happened. That was the neural and the ventilator. They agreed. So we talked about the synchrony all the time, and now suddenly we talk about synchrony, because everyone says, how comes this? And I'm going to show you. The problem is this is like, think about First World War. You're out here somewhere in the fields, and what is the most efficient weapon you have? The machine gun. The rate of hitting something is almost zero, but since you shoot so many times, you will hit something whether you like it or not. So you will be to the left, to the right, but never hit the guy in the middle because you're on either side of him. So what we're dealing with here is too early off cycling, too late off cycling, wasted efforts, everything. It's a mess, but I will show you that later. Tidal volumes were not different between the groups, so they were, and the same goes for minute ventilation, which I don't think we had here. So it was really no difference in breathing pattern until we started to look to the inspiratory and expiratory times. Then we found that the neural inspiratory time was always the same, both for inspiration and expiration. So neural expiratory time and inspiratory time were always the same for the neural part. But when you look for the ventilator, the pressure was delivered. It was a difference. So there was longer inspiratory time and shorter expiratory time during NAVA than it was during the other modes. So the distribution of a breath within the breath is different. So this is where it gets complicated. But if you look at this tracing, you start to understand what I'm talking about. You see a number of breaths during the SIMV. This one triggers on time and ends at time. This one triggers too early, ends later. This triggered way too early. There's the EDI. Sorry, the EDI this is way too late, sorry. So that the pressure comes too late and it cycles off very early. So you have a very short breath here. Here's another delay. And when we started to analyze these breaths, you see here, like here's a slight EDI activity, started the breath. Here is like another big EDI activity, but gave just a little breath. Here is a wasted effort and so on. But when we started to do this manually, we were about to go crazy. When you do we want to do like half an hour analysis, analyze all the data, but there's no way. We have to build computer algorithms to start to detect these things. When we look at NAVA, I'll just give you an overview here. What you have is that the pattern up here is more or less a reflection of the pattern down here. And remember now, this is 60 times a minute, so this goes fast. So what we created is a new index. I just put neurosync instead of saying, as everybody says, the synchrony index, which is the one that we refer to breaths, the synchrony between neural breaths. Now we're talking about the synchrony between neural breaths, but also a synchrony in the neural breaths. What we have a look at here is simply that we say that when a breath starts, we have a neural inspiration period. That can either start when the previous inspiration ended, or when the current inspiration ends. So you can either be 100% too early, which means that you more or less re-trigger as soon as you stop, or 100% too late, that means that you trigger when the effort is ceasing. For off-cycling, it's the same thing. 100% too early would be that you start when the EDI starts. You ultimately should stop when the EDI ends, and you should then have stopped the ventilator before the EDI starts again. So why we did this was just we could put this then. So here we have the inspiration. So here you have the neural exhalation time on this part here, and the inspiration time here. If we say minus 100, that means that you actually start when the previous neural effort just ended. That's when the ventilator starts. If you start when the ventilator when the EDI starts, then you're synchronized, you end up in the middle here, you end up here. If you then stop when the EDI stops, stop the ventilator when the EDI stops, you end up perfectly in the middle. So the idea we had here was simply when you think about the dartboard, when you threw dart, if you hit the spot in the middle, you are synchronized. If you go up to the left here, well, you are late to trigger, but you are early to cycle off. If you go up to the right, you are late to trigger, and you are late to cycle off. So then we created these plots. What you see here is one example of one patient. So this is half an hour breathing, or 20 minutes of breathing, on each of these three graphs during each mode. So this is SIMV pressure support. Before we did anything, so this was the setting that the doctor had chosen. This is NAVA, this is SIMV pressure support after we had optimized or adjusted the ventilator. And what we see here is that for SIMV pressure support, when it's blue or red in the middle here, that's where all the breaths lands in this patient. And I put up a little box here because we said, we go back to the previous slide, that if we are about 30% too early or 30% too late to cycle off, or 30% trigger, 30% too early or 30% too late to cycle off, we say we can live with that. 1/3 error, okay, fine. It's a lot, but still, let's say fine. We just put this little box there to make it more simple to understand that if you fall inside this box, well, you are synchronized because now you are less than 1/3 away from the bullseye. If you're outside the box, you're gone. So we counted what goes in the box and what goes outside the box. And of course, then double triggering, asynchrony breaths, like wasted efforts and so on, went outside the box. So we can see here with NAVA that we made a spot in the middle, and of course, since the EDI is the reference, where else could we land? The only times we fell off was when the ventilator went into backup or went into then the thing called NAVA PS, which is a kind of a pressure support. If we look at the patients here, you can see that many of these patients started their breath way too early and cycled off way too early. Most of them, the majority, you see these red spots here, started too late and cycled off too early. They got very little time of the breath actually assisted. It could be never less than 1/3, but still, since this is outside, it could be less than 1/3 because it's outside this 1/3 box. It's actually at 40% or something 35. So what we can show here is more of an index that you can, if you look at this, you can see where the asynchrony sits. But you look at now data from 20 minutes. When you do this analysis, you usually get data from the last minute or last 2 minutes. That's how much we pick out. Or if we look for those wasted efforts, that's asynchronies that occur between breaths. This is asynchrony during the neural effort. Looking at the bottom graph here, we have a distribution between, here you have the breaths that fell within the box during pressure SIMV. You see here, it's only 25%. This is what fell outside the box. And these are wasted efforts, the red ones here, for example. So to give you the statistics of what fell inside the box, we had 80% of the NAVA breaths fell within the box for the group mean. So that's out of 23 patients. And the standard deviation is not very high. In SIMV and pressure support, they fell 25% of the breaths fell inside the box. That means 75% of the breaths were not triggered with an error less than 1/3 of the previous neural expiratory time or the inspiratory time, which I think is rather dramatic. When we look upon wasted efforts, that means EDI without assist, we had 15% of the breaths were wasted and 5% during SIMV pressure support, 5% with NAVA. Assist without EDI, that's auto-triggering or backup, was with SIMV pressure support 10% and with NAVA 4%. And we have double triggering, which is repeated assist during neural efforts. That was about 2 and 3%. It was lower in NAVA. And then we have something we call repeated neural efforts during assist. That's when you have the respiratory rate is so high that you get several neural efforts during the same assist period. That was also a small minority, though, only 3%. In conclusion, the study reveals that conventional modes are limited in their ability to provide synchronous ventilation in premature babies. And it shows that NAVA improves patient-ventilator interaction in premature babies. Thank you very much.